Hello, everyone. I'm Anton Garcia Fernandez, and I publish the jazz blog Jazz Flashes. Welcome to a new video that I am recording to publish precisely in Jazz Flashes and also on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite vocal jazz and classic pop critic that I have ever had the pleasure of reading. I'm talking about Mr. Will Friedwald. Mr. Friedwald is based out of New York City and has written about cabaret and jazz and classic pop music in general for many years for different publications, The Village Voice, the Wall Street Journal, and many others. But most of all, he has written some very interesting, very witty, very readable books about the subject of jazz, vocal jazz in particular, and classic pop. And I'm going to talk about five of my favorite books by Will Friedwald, who's also helped Tony Bennett write his autobiography called The Good Life, and he's also even written books about Warner Brothers cartoons. In any case, we're going to concentrate on five of the best books that Will Friedwald has written over the years. He's been at it since the 1980s and has published a lot of interesting books in the 90s and also in the 21st century. And the latest one was published last year in 2017. We'll be talking about that one as well. I've followed the work of Will Friedwald since the 1990s, and it has been very personally enriching to me to read these books. I learned a lot. I discovered a lot of great music thanks to Mr. Friedwald. And this short video is my tribute to him for the wonderful work that he has done throughout the years. And we're going to go back to 1996, and this is the first book by Will Friedwald that I ever read. Back when I was still living in Europe, I got a copy of it and was absolutely mesmerized by its contents, by how well written it was, by the depth and the amount of the knowledge displayed in here. The book is called Jazz Singing, Americans' Great Voices from Bessie Smith to Bebop and Beyond. Like I said, it's the first book that I've read by Will Friedwald many, many years ago, and it features an eye-opening analysis of jazz and jazz-influenced pop singing going back to the 1920s and 1930s. Many early jazz and jazz-influenced singers I had the chance to hear about for the first time here, among them Annette Hanshaw or Cliff Edwards, also known as Ukulele Ike, even the great Al Bowley, one of the most important British crooners of the 1930s and early 40s. One of my favorite chapters in this book, Jazz Singing, is the chapter that Will Friedwald entitled Mr. Satch and Mr. Cross, Louis Armstrong and Bing Crosby. I think this chapter is particularly important because it is a marvelous explanation of the importance of Bing Crosby and Louis Armstrong, who were friends and influenced each other, and whose singing styles changed the face of popular music in the 1930s. That one in particular was a chapter that caught my attention, but of course there's many more in the book, going through the swing era up to the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond. Book was published originally in 1996, and really this is the book that I would recommend anyone start reading the work of Will Friedwald to purchase. Maybe Mr. Friedwald has changed some of the ideas and opinions that he had here, but it's still a highly readable, very witty book that I think anyone interested in jazz and jazz vocals will be interested in. Now, anyone who knows me and anyone who has read my blogs and has watched any of the videos or podcasts that I have been working on for the past few years knows that I am a huge fan of the great Frank Sinatra, and I believe that Will Friedwald wrote the most important, the best book about Frank Sinatra's music ever written. It's this book that I have here, the next one on my pile, Sinatra, The Song Is You, A Singer's Art. This is a book published in 1997, and as I said just a few seconds ago, I don't think there's a better book about the music of Frank Sinatra than this one right here. And if I am interested in Sinatra, it's more because of his music than because of his biography or his life. There are some really good biographies of Frank Sinatra out there, and I've read most of them, all the biographies I've been able to find. But when it comes to writing about his music, I don't think anyone has ever done a better job than Will Friedwald on this book here, Sinatra, The Song Is You. The music of Sinatra really is what should interest us the most, and in order to learn about his music, this is the only place to start, I think. Friedwald goes in depth into each album. He divides the career of Frank Sinatra into periods, either by collaborator, so Harry James or Tommy Dorsey, or by arranger, which is also very interesting. Nelson Riddle, Gordon Jenkins, Billy May, etc. There were so many great arrangers that worked with Frank Sinatra, and I think it is a great idea to study each collaboration with these arrangers in depth, and putting all the great concept albums that Sinatra recorded together with each one of these great arrangers. As I said, if you like Frank Sinatra, if you're interested in the music of Frank Sinatra more than in the life of Frank Sinatra, just like me, then Sinatra, The Song Is You by Will Friedwald is definitely the way to go and the place to start. Other books are good when they talk about Sinatra's music. For example, Charles Granada's book about Sinatra's sessions, which I think is called Sessions with Sinatra, is also a good book, but it doesn't go as much in depth as Will Friedwald does in this book right here. The next one is, I think, a very interesting concept because it traces the history of 12 of the most popular songs from the Great American Songbook, and then analyzes the best interpretations of them that have been recorded over the years. I'm talking about the next book on my pile here. Stardust Melodies is the title, a biography of 12 of America's most popular songs. I really love this concept of the biography of a song, and I think Will Friedwald does a fantastic job on this book, unearthing the most interesting details about the creation of each one of the songs that he's chosen. We're talking about some of the most important songs from the Great American Songbook, from Stardust to the St. Louis Blues, Mac the Knife, Old Man River, Body and Soul, I Got Rhythm, As Time Goes By, Night and Day, Stormy Weather, Summertime, My Funny Valentine, and Lush Live, starting in the teens and going up all the way to the 1930s, the golden age of the Great American Songbook, of American songwriting. It really is an eye-opening book that will have you looking for the different versions of each song, listening to them, rediscovering them, comparing them, some of them actually discovering for the first time. The depth of knowledge that Will Friedwald displays in this book about the Great American Songbook, about the different versions of these songs, is absolutely amazing. So if you really want to know about the history of any of these songs, and then actually get a glimpse, but not just a glimpse, actually a very in-depth analysis of each one of these songs, this is the place to go. Stardust Melodies, a biography of 12 of America's most popular songs. This was published in 2002, and it's also one of my favorite top 5 books by Will Friedwald. And it's also, like the rest of them, incredibly readable. You don't need to know a ton about musical theory or anything like that to enjoy and to understand what Will Friedwald is talking about here on Stardust Melodies. Then there's 2 more books, the most recent ones, and actually in many ways the biggest and most in-depth ones, starting with one published in 2010. This is one my wife gave me for my birthday one year, and it was definitely the best gift that I got for my birthday that year. Talking about 2010, A Biographical Guide of the Great Jazz and Pop Singers by Will Friedwald. I love the design on the cover as well. This book, just this um, microphone in front of this white background, and the title of it right there, A Biographical Guide to the Great Jazz and Pop Singers. And this is what it is. It's a biographical guide to the great jazz and jazz-influenced pop singers. I consider this sort of a culmination of what Will Friedwald began in jazz singing. It includes in-depth entries on a multitude of jazz singers and jazz-influenced pop singers. But it's not simply an encyclopedia-style sort of entry where you get all the information about where they were born and what they did and what they recorded and when they died and that sort of thing. No, that's not what you get here. This is a book that has lots of different entries on some of the most important jazz and jazz-influenced pop singers in history. And each entry amounts to a full-length essay that explores the careers and the recordings of each artist from a critical point of view. Lots of opinions here. And I think one of the nice things about Will Friedwald is that he is not afraid to give you his opinion, personal opinion about a recording or an artist or an album or a song or an arrangement. And one may agree or may not agree with him, but he always has you thinking about it. There's a reason why he's writing what he's writing. He's thought about this a million times over. He's listened to these songs and these albums and these artists many times, and so I give a lot of value to Will Friedwald's opinions, even when I may not agree fully with all of the things that he says. Reading this book, reading the different entries, and of course they're in alphabetical order, but one need not read them in alphabetical order necessarily. Reading these entries will have you rethinking your preconceived ideas, your preconceived opinions about specific artists and albums, and also discovering some albums you may not have heard of before, and like happened to me, trying to find them on vinyl or CD to complete your collection based on the description and the judgments of value that Will Friedwald displays in this book. Definitely a book to have, definitely a book to have handy on your shelf and read. I think I read it, or I go through some of its pages and reread some parts pretty much every week. I love reading this book. It's very well written, and it definitely does not disappoint. And finally, a big surprise that we got last year from Will Friedwald. It had been 7 years since the publication of the Biographical Guide to the Great Jazz and Pop Singers in 2010. And last year, in 2017, he came out with this book. What a beautiful cover, too. So you can see it, and the light doesn't get in the way. The Great Jazz and Pop Vocal Albums. Again, I feel like jazz singing might be the origin of this new book, because that book, Jazz Singing, at the very end, included an appendix with a list of desert island vocal albums, albums that you should not show up at a desert island without. If Robinson Crusoe had a gramophone player or a record player or an 8-track player or a CD player, he definitely should have these albums with him on the desert island. But this seems to be sort of an expansion in many ways of that concept. This book has 51 chapters that are in-depth reviews of what Will Friedwald considers the most influential jazz and pop vocal albums ever recorded. And I think that's really interesting because we have, of course, albums by Frank Sinatra, Joe Stafford, Peggy Lee, Johnny Hartman, the John Coltrane Johnny Hartman album, for example. We have a few by Bing Crosby, June Christie, Rosemary Clooney, Nat King Cole, and then some lesser-known singers, some singers you might not be thinking about, like Matt Dennis, who is also a fantastic songwriter, or Bobby Trout, who was also fine songwriter in his own right. Of course, we got Louis Armstrong, and we got Fred Astaire too, which I totally agree that Fred Astaire was one of the great jazz singers of all time, even though he's more credited with his dancing, or he's more recognized for his dancing than he is for his singing. The Tony Bennett and Bill Evans album is in here as well. Some Chet Baker, of course, Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington, Margaret Whiting, that's one of my favorites, as is Lee Wiley. Well, this is really a fantastic book, and I think the way that Will Friedwald starts the preface kind of sums up what this book is all about. Over the decades, I've been listening to jazz in the American Songbook, he says. It's become increasingly apparent that there are certain albums that are more important than others. You can tell the standout albums, sometimes even without actually listening to them, because it seems as if all roads lead back to them. So that's what this book includes. Essays, in-depth essays about those vocal and jazz and pop albums that over the years, all roads have led back to these albums. And I think it's a very nice concept. And once again, I feel like this is the perfect companion to the previous three books, to the previous two books, Stardust Melodies and the Biographical Guide. You may agree with the inclusion of a specific album or the exclusion of another, but after reading each chapter, one will definitely agree that Will Friedwald's choice belongs in the collection of any serious jazz and classic pop fan. Of course, there may be others that are not here that should be in the collection, but definitely the ones that are here should be in the collection of anyone who's serious about vocal jazz and classic pop. Also very interesting is the introductory essay that traces the origins and the development of the pop music album between the 1920s and the 1940s. Actually, the first concept album, pop concept album that Will Friedwald has singled out is To Mother from the 1920s, and then of course there's a very interesting discussion of what a pop music album is up until Frank Sinatra's The Voice from the 1940s, which was Sinatra's first concept album released for Columbia well before his famous concept albums for Capitol Records in the 1950s. Great book to have if you don't have it yet. The Great Jazz and Pop Vocal Albums, released in 2017, published in 2017, just a few months ago, by Will Friedwald. Once again, as we wind down this video for Jazz Flashes and for my YouTube channel, Anton GF, I want to express once again my admiration for the work of Will Friedwald, who, in my opinion, is the best, the most knowledgeable, and the most readable too, most entertaining critic of vocal jazz and classic pop. Any of the books that he has written on the subject are recommendable, but particularly the 5 that I have talked about in this video today, starting with Jazz Singing from 1996, Sinatra, The Song Is You, A Singer's Art from 1997, Stardust Melodies, a biography of 12 of America's most popular songs from 2002, a biographical guide to the great jazz and pop singers from 2010, and the latest book by Will Friedwald, The Great Jazz and Pop Vocal Albums from 2017. I would like to thank everyone for watching this video. If you have any comments, make sure to leave them underneath the video here on YouTube. And once again, my congratulations and my deepest gratitude to the great Will Friedwald. I hope he will keep up the good work. He will keep publishing books, writing and publishing books as good as these 5 books that I have reviewed on this video. This is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and the copyright for this video, 2018, is for myself, for Anton Garcia Fernandez. and the video was recorded live in Martin, Tennessee, in the United States of America. Thank you for watching and listening to me, and I hope to hear from you soon. If not, remember to read any of the articles about jazz that I've written on Jazz Flashes at jazzflashes.blogspot.com. Thank you, and so long, everybody.